In this video, let's build on top of the basic routing and add nested routes and dynamic route matching. First, nested routes. What are they? Why do we need them? Let's look at an example. Recall the application we created in the last video. The view route renders the home component, blog posts component, and about component in this display area. Now, let's add more contents in this blog posts view or page. So this is what we're going to implement in this video. As you can see, the blog posts view has a new layout, the left part and the right part. On the left part, there is a list of blog posts, and the right side shows the detailed content of a blog post when I click one blog post in this list. So here is blog post 1, blog post 2, 3, 4, 5. And pay attention to the URL, /blogposts/5. So here 5 means blog ID is 5. You might already realize that on this blog posts page, I used view router again to navigate between different blog posts. That's right. This is done through view router's nested routes configuration. Let's go to the slides and visualize the relationship among those components. Recall that in the last video, the router view component, which is denoted by the red area with a dashed border, is defined directly in the app component. We call this router view a top-level router view. It is responsible to render the home view, the blog posts view, and the about view. Similarly, the rendered view, blog posts, can also contain its own router view component. So inside this view, we can define a blog post list on the left side and a router view component on the right side. Note that now there are two router view components. One in the app component, rendering some top-level components like home, blog posts, and about. The other in the blog posts view, rendering individual blog post, like blog post with ID equal to 1, or 2, or 3, and so on. We see that this router view is nested in the outer router view. Now you know why we call these nested routes. That means we also need to define a blog post component, like this. Then how do we configure the view router and let it know we want to render the blog post component inside this router view, not this one? We need to modify the router configuration JS file, like this. To render components into this nested router view, we need to use the children option in the second route, the blog posts route. This syntax means that the blog post component will be rendered inside blog posts router view when the path /blogposts/:ID is matched. This path has two parts. /blogposts is called the static segment of this path, and the :ID is the dynamic segment of this path. It is also called the param of the path. Apparently, in this case, the param represents the ID of a blog post. For example, /blogposts/1 matches this pattern and is mapped to the blog post component. /blogpost/2 or 3 or 4 or 5 also matches this pattern and is mapped to the same blog post component. So different blog posts are reusing the same blog post component, which makes sense because they all have a title and a content, right? As you saw from the demo. The only thing that is different is the ID, which is the param in the path URL. This is called dynamic route matching. That is, we're mapping different URLs, different param values, to the same route and to the same component. As you can see, the children option is just another array of routes, like routes itself. Therefore, you can keep nesting components as much as you need. We call them sub-routes. There is a small issue here. At this point, with this route configuration, when you visit the URL/blogPosts, nothing will be rendered inside the blogPosts router view. Why? Because no nested route is matched. We did not provide the ID as a param. Maybe you do want to render something there, like a landing page. In such case, you can provide an empty nested path, like this. By the way, here is a pair of single quotes. So if we just go to /blogPosts, it will not render a specific blog post. Instead, it will show this blog posts greeting component. That means we also need to define a blog posts greeting component, like here. In this component, we can just display a message reminding the user to click a blog post in the list. Think of it as a landing page. Now, let's click the blog posts tab, like here. According to the route configuration here, this blog posts component is rendered here. As you can see, at the same time, according to the children routes, the blog posts greeting component is rendered in the router view inside this blog posts component. So far, so good. Next, let's click a blog in this blog post list, like this. For example, let's click blog post 1. Since /blogposts/1 is matched according to the routes defined here, the blog post component is rendered here. Of course, showing the detailed blog post of blog post 1. If I click a different blog, the same blog post component will be reused. But of course, the content is changed. It's showing the detailed content of blog post 2, right? And let me remind you again that there are two router views now. Or in other words, there are two red areas with a dashed border. The top level is responsible for showing top-level views or pages, like home, blog posts, and about. The nested router view, defined in the blog posts view component, is responsible for rendering a blog posts greeting page or a specific blog post content. That's it. Okay, now you have a good understanding of nested routes and dynamic route matching. Let's go ahead and implement them. Let's go to VS Code. First, let me create a new Git branch from the previous Git branch. Please note, right now I'm on branch view router basic routing, which is the branch from the previous video. So Git branch. And let's call this new branch view router nested routes dynamic route matching. And let's switch to that new Git branch. Git switch. Okay, note that we're now on branch view router nested routes dynamic route matching. In this demo, we need to fetch a list of blog posts, but we don't really have a backend ready to serve the data. So we need to simulate the backend API endpoint. Let me show you a very useful tool called JSON Server. Let's install JSON Server first. npm install JSON Server -g. So this is a global installation. JSON Server is a tool for creating a mock REST API from a simple JSON file, enabling Vue developers to quickly prototype, test, and integrate API functionalities without a fully functional real backend. Very useful during development, and it is highly recommended. Next, let's create a db.json file with some fake blog post data. And here, let's place this file in the root of our Vue project directory. And let's call this db.json. You can call it whatever name you want. Next, let me copy and paste the fake data. You can find a link to this file in the description of this video. So copy and paste. Let me close this for now. So in this db.json file, we defined one JSON object. Inside this JSON object, this is the first property. The key is blog posts, and the value is an array of blog posts. This is the first one. Each blog post has an ID, a title, and a content. The same structure. And in this case, there are 10 different blog posts. The second property in this JSON object is users. And here we have a list of users. Each user has an ID, username, enabled or not, and roles. Don't worry about this for now. All right. Let me close this. Next, let's launch JSON server and make it serve the data we defined in the db.json. And then we're going to test the fake API endpoints. In your terminal, let's type this: npx JSON server db.json. So using this command, JSON server will serve the data we defined in db.json through some fake API endpoints. Okay, as you can see, now we have two fake API endpoints, /blog posts and /users. So let's click this one. As you can see, when we request this API endpoint, the JSON server serves all the blog posts to the front end. And here is an array of JSON objects. The first blog post, second one, third one, recall that there are 10. So this endpoint provides a list of blog posts, right? What if I only need one blog post? Like I want to find blog post by ID. Simple. JSON server also supports this URL, blog posts /ID. For example, let's say we only want to find blog post with ID 1. So just put 1 here, making a request. Okay, we only have one JSON object returned, which is ID 1, title, the magic of Hogwarts, and so on. So what about 2? That's the next blog post, and so on and so forth. Next, let's also try users. As you can see here, JSON server returns the 3 users we defined in the db.json. And of course, we can also use users /1 or /2 or /3 to get individual users. Okay. Now that we have the fake API endpoint /blog posts, let's create a dedicated JavaScript file for fetching those blog posts. This modular approach improves code organization and reusability. So under src, right-click, let's create a new folder, and let's call it APIs. And under this folder, let's create a JS file, and let's call it blogposts.js. Here, let's define 2 functions representing 2 HTTP requests to the blog posts endpoint. The first one is called const find all. And here, let's define const response await. I'm not going to use Axios. Let's just use the fetch API. This is great. and return await response.json. Good. So this function will make an HTTP request to this endpoint and get a list of blog posts back. The second function is const find by ID. Similarly, we're going to make an HTTP request, but to a different endpoint. /blog posts / here is the ID, which is the input to this function. So if this is 1, this will be blog posts /1. If this is 2, this will be /2. So here we're going to return a specific blog post. All right, this is great. And they both work. But let's make it more robust. So right now, we didn't consider any exception when we make this HTTP request. To make it more robust, let's wrap this in try catch. And if there's an error, let's console log the error. And rethrow the error to be caught by the caller. All right, same thing here. Within the try, before we return await response.json, let's have one more check. If response is not okay, and here let's throw a new error. And let's call this error fetching blog posts. And we're going to show the error code. For example, 401, 403, or 404. If response.ok is true, then we can go ahead and return the list of blog posts. All right, same thing here. If response is not okay, throw new error. Error fetching blog post, response.status text. Otherwise, return await response.json. All right, great. Next, let's add a comment to each function. So here, let's add a description. This one is fetch all blog posts from the API. And it returns a promise that resolves to an array of blog posts. Okay. Same thing here. Fetch a single blog post by its ID. The input is the ID of the blog post, and it returns a promise that resolves to a specific blog post object. All right. In the end, if you look at the two URLs, apparently this is duplicate. And based on a programming principle, dry or don't repeat yourself, let's extract this URL into a variable. And let's call it base URL. And of course, here we need to define this base URL. And let me copy this. So this is good. Fetch from here. And for this one, since this is template literal, so let's do this $, and make sure you put this variable in this $ open and close curly braces. Okay. Good. Good. Okay, so here let me add more information with ID. Now, finally, don't forget to export these two defined functions. Default, find all, find by ID. So make sure you don't forget line 40. Otherwise, other modules cannot use these two functions. All right, all the preparation work is done. let's implement the nested routes and dynamic route matching. We'll first define the blog post list component that shows a list of blog posts that are fetched from the fake JSON server. Then define the blog posts greeting component that shows the default page when no blog is clicked or no blog ID is provided in the URL. And finally, let's define the blog post component that shows the details of a clicked blog post. Along the way, we'll define the router configuration JavaScript file. Let's get started. First, let's create a blog post list component. So here under components, right-click, new file, blog post list.view. Vbase. So this is a component that renders the requested blog list. So here, let's put an h2 blog posts. And here we're going to have a list of clickable blog post titles. Before we complete the template, the script, and the CSS, let's go to blog posts, and we're going to put the blog post list inside it. Okay, so let's get rid of those text. Recall that on the left side should be the blog post list, and the right side should be the router view. So here I'm going to use a side, and this will be blog post list. And of course, we need to import it first. And then down here, let's use main router view. Okay. So let's launch my project. So make sure the JSON server is on. Let's click add. Now in a different terminal, npm run dev. Okay. So let's see this in the browser. Okay, now let's click blog posts. All right, as you can see here, this is the blog post list. This is the h2 blog posts. And down here, we have the router view. All right, so first, let's give it a little bit of CSS. Let's give it a class here. Let's call this blog posts layout. And down here, let's define this. Let's make this div a flexbox. The blog post is right here, and the main, this part here, will be on the right side. Okay, so let's make it 1 rem. And let's give a side a class as well. Blog post list, that's good. And let's give this main a class, blog post content. Very good. So inside here, let's define these two classes. Blog post list. And here is blog post content. So here, let me give it a color to visualize this main element. So for example, aqua. And let me put something here. Hello. Okay, so now they're side by side, right? And here, I want the blog post to take 25% of the width. And the blog post content to take 75%. Okay, so this is the blog post list, and this will be the content of that blog post. Okay, so right now there's nothing. I hard-coded a hello there. Okay, cool. So we have this layout ready. Okay, now let's go back to blog post list and define the template here. But first, in order to display a list of blog posts title here, we need to first fetch them from the JSON server. And we can do that in the script of this component. So let's define a variable, const blog posts ref. It starts with an empty array. Okay, but of course we need to import ref from view. Next, we need to fetch the blog posts from the server when this blog post list component is first mounted. Recall there is a lifecycle hook function called onMounted. And when this component is mounted, let's call a function load blog posts. Don't worry, we haven't defined this function yet. Next, let's define this function. Async function load blog posts. Recall that we already defined a function find all in this blogposts.js. So all we need to do is to import API from @APIs blog posts. And of course, here we need to import onMounted as well. All right, so here, blog posts dot value API dot find all. This will populate the blog posts. All right. Next, let's render them here. First, let me simply just show you the blog posts. Save. All right, as you can see, we already have them. This is the first one. This is the second one. And this is the 10th one. Okay. And apparently this is a horrible way of rendering a list of blog posts. So let's get rid of this. So here we should create a list of router links that represents a list of clickable blog post titles. Okay, so this looks good. Thank you, Copilot. And make sure let's close this. So here is blog post in blog posts. And the key is blog post.id. And for 2, this should be blog post. We haven't defined this yet in the router configuration, but this looks good, blog post. And then we're going to attach the blog post ID to the path. Okay. Then in here, let's render blog post.title. Save. Now, as you can see, it's not showing the list of titles. Let's press F12 and see the error message. No match for this route. Okay, which makes sense because we haven't defined it yet. So don't worry. Let's go to index under src/router. So here is the route for blog posts. And let's define a children option. And recall from the design, for the subroute, the path is blog posts/id. Component should be blog post. We haven't defined this yet, so don't worry. But let's also give it a name. And the name should be blog post. Now be careful. The name of this route is blog post, but the path is blog posts/id. So this can be 1 or 2 or 3. Okay, now it's not happy because we haven't defined this blog post component. And that's easy. So let's go to views and create a new view or page called blogpost.view, way base. And here, just put some random thing. Hello world. Then come back to index.js, import it. Good. All right, so now if I come back here and click one title, you see this is hello world. Recall that the blog post component is rendered here. This list is really ugly for now. If I click a third one, fourth one, I don't really know which one is the fourth one or fifth one, but when I click those links, the blog post component is rendered here in this router view. All right, so next, let's spend some time styling this list. Okay, so here I'm in blog post list. Let's add a class here, and I'll call it blog list container. And let's wrap this in a div with a class called blog post list. Paste it here. Let's also give this router link a class. Blog item. All right, so we added 3 classes, blog post container, to this div. And for the div that wraps this router link, we have blog post list. And for each router link, there's a class called blog item. Okay, then let's define some CSS. To save time, I'll just copy and paste some predefined CSS. Since this tutorial is not about CSS, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The link to the CSS is included in the description of this video. Just go there and copy and paste. Don't spend too much time on CSS. Let's focus on view router. Paste and save. Okay. Now it looks much better, right? Click this one, click this one, click this one. You see, when I click this one, this link is active and others are turned off, right? Okay, it's pretty good. Next, let's define this important view, blogpost.view. Similar to the blog post list component, when this blog post component is first mounted, we need to fetch the content of a specific blog post. But which blog post should we request? Of course, the one being clicked. So right now, the blog post with ID equal to 1 is clicked. As you can see here, the param of this URL is 1. So here we should render blog post 1's title, content, and so on. Then how do we retrieve this param from this URL? It's very easy, because view router places the values of all the params of a path in a built-in variable called route.params, and it is available in every component. In this case, since there's only one param, we can just use route.params.id, since ID is the only param in params. So for example here, let's use the mustache notation, $route params.id, save. Okay, so now this is 1. If I click the second blog post, now this is 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so now in the script, let's define a variable called blog post to hold the retrieved blog post. And of course, initially it is null. Let's import ref from view. Then on mounted, load blog post. And here we're going to pass the ID. And unfortunately, we cannot use this $sign in the script. You can use it in template, but not in the script. So let me show you the second way that we access the route params. So here, before onMounted, let's define route. And here is use route, but we need to import use route from view router. And of course, we also need to import unmounted. Okay, so ref and unmounted are from Vue.js. Use route is from view router. Make sure you import from the right package. Okay. This function will return the current route. And the route.params.id will return the current ID. And we pass it to this function, load blog post. Here, I need to define this load blog post. Okay, thank you, Copilot. API.findById, we pass ID to it, and we update this blog post. But we need to import API first. So import API from @/API/blog posts. So now the data is ready. Let's render the details of this blog post. So here we're going to have a div blog ID, paste. Then let's have a h1 that has blog post dot title. Then another div with a p in it. We have the blog post content. Okay, so there's a problem. Let's press F12 and see what's going on. All right, so there are several problems, but let's handle this one first. Hook is not a function. So here, this is not correct. So here, I'm trying to call this function immediately. However, I should really pass an arrow function to this hook function. Remember, we need to pass a callback to be called after the component has been mounted, instead of calling it right here. So this is not the correct syntax. This means we're calling it right now, but this one means we're passing this as a function. And this function will get called in unmounted. Okay, so let's refresh. Still doesn't work. Let's go to F12. All right, cannot read properties of null. So it seems like the blog post is null. Well, that's weird, because apparently we load the blog post first, right? Let me explain. The unmounted hook function runs after the component is mounted. That's correct. But fetching data with load blog post is asynchronous. So this blog post ref does not get populated immediately. While this load blog post function is busy loading the blog post, the template here is rendered immediately. It will not wait for the completion of this asynchronous request. So that means before blog post gets populated, Vue already renders this as soon as it is mounted, before this load blog post promise resolves. This means the initial render happens while blog post is still null. That explains why we cannot get the title or the content. So what should we do? Let's add a conditional check in the template to make sure that blog post is not null. If it's null, don't render. Otherwise, render it. So here in this outer div, let's have a v-if blog post. If v blog post is populated, then render the ID, title, and content. All right, so let's try again. Refresh. Okay, now we have it. Blog ID 5, the mystery of the Marauders map, and here is the paragraph. Okay, now let's get rid of this ugly background. In blog posts, Okay, so let's get rid of this background color. Okay, now it's much better. Next, let's style this blog post a little bit. So let's add one more div outside this div and give this a class name, blog post container. And here, let's give it a class, blog title. And here, class, blog content. Okay. And then let's go down here and copy and paste some styles. And you can find those styles in the description of this video. Paste. All right, now it looks much better. All right, it looks like everything's done, but there is a bug here. Let me show you. Right now, we're showing the blog post with ID equal to 5. So this is highlighted, and here is the param, and everything is fine. Now, what if I want to see the first blog? That's easy. Let's just go here and click this. Now, pay attention to the blog post component, and also pay attention to the URL param. So click. What happened? As you can see, the URL is changing, and so is $route.params.id, because this one is synchronized with this param, so no surprise. But the blog post component is not updating its content. It's still showing the content of blog post with ID 5. And let me show you more. Let's press F12 and go to network. Okay, clean. Let's go to home. Go to blog posts. So let's click the first blog. As you can see, Vue is sending this HTTP request, blog posts /1. Let's click the second blog post. The URL param changes to 2. However, no HTTP request is sent. Why? So we made it very clear here that every time this component is mounted, we're going to call await API find by ID. And we know this one will send a request to fetch a new blog post. For example, find by ID 2 or find by ID 3. But why this is not working? What's going on? What happens here is that when we navigate from, say, blog posts /1 to blog posts /2, the same blog post component is reused. Since both routes render the same component, this is more efficient than destroying the old instance and then creating a new one. However, attention here, this also means that the lifecycle hooks of this component would not be called. In our case, this unmounted function will not be called again when we go from blog posts 1 to blog post 2. That explains why Vue is not sending the second find by ID when we navigate from blog post 1 to blog post 2. Then what should we do? To react to param changes in the same component, we can use watchers. So we can simply watch anything on the route object. In this case, we can choose to watch this route.params.id. If it changes, we're going to invoke this load blog post function. So here's how. Watch. And here, let's make it explicit. New ID and old ID. And of course, we're going to load blog post with new ID. Don't forget to import watch from Vue. Okay, so let's refresh. We have blog ID 2. Now if I click blog ID 1, okay, So now the content changed, right? So let's click ID 3, ID 4, 5, 6, ID 10. Actually, once we have the watcher, we no longer need unmounted. So let's get rid of unmounted. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it works as well. But there is a small bug here. I'm not sure if you have noticed that. So for example, let me refresh. So here, even though we're requesting to see blog post 6, but we don't have anything. But if I click another one, so we can see it. Let's go back to blog 6. You can see it. But why, if I reload the page, I'm not seeing blog post 6? This is because watch is lazy by default. The callback won't be called until the watched source has changed. When we refresh the page, since watch is lazy by default, the callback won't be called. We can force a watcher's callback to be executed immediately by passing the immediate is equal to true option. So the way to solve this problem is to add another option here. It's called immediate equal to true. So in this case, if I refresh, I will see the blog post 6 immediately. So blog post 2, 1, 3, and 4. An alternative to watchers is something called navigation guards, which we'll cover in a future video. Okay, let's continue. If I'm not providing the param, press enter. Here is empty. Recall that this is not very user-friendly. We want to have a landing page encouraging the user to click through this list of blog posts. So let's create a blog posts greeting page. Right-click, new file, blog posts greeting.view. And let me copy and paste the content. So this is just some static content. Welcome to the blog posts page. Here you can find all the blog posts that have been published by our authors. Click on any of them to read more. And here are a bunch of CSS. All right. Then let's add it to the router configuration. Let's go to index.js under router. Path. And the component should be blog posts greeting. Okay. As you can see, if I do not provide /id, this greeting page is rendered. But if I click blog post 1, this will be replaced by the blog post component. But if I go back here, we cannot see anything here. So let me introduce another important option here called redirect. And here, redirect to name blog posts greeting. That means we also need to give this name to this route. Okay. So now this time, if I go to home and go to blog posts, we have this. It works fine. So that means if we're requesting this path, View Router will automatically redirect this request to this child path or this subpath and showing the blog posts greeting in this router view. In this simple application, we're using an integer as the ID of a blog. So we can access blog post /1 or 2 or 3. So what if the user accidentally put ABC? So this means I want to access a blog post with ID equal to ABC. So if I press enter, nothing is here because we don't have a blog post with ID equal to ABC. Let's take a look at the console as well. So this is a 404. There's no blog post with ID equal to ABC. So if we want to make sure that only numeric values like 1 or 2 or 3 is allowed here, we can add a regular expression right after :ID, like this. 1 or more digits. So in this case, if I go to blog post 1, no problem. And blog post 100, which does not exist. In this case, it will show me 404. There's no blog post with ID equal to 100, but 100 is allowed. It is matched to this path, since 100 is a numeric value. But if I try to access ABC, press enter, this entire web page crashed. And let's go to the console. It says no match found for location with path blog posts /ABC. In other words, Vue router cannot find a qualified path to route this request. This URL will not be interpreted as this path, since this path only allows numeric values after blog post /, but this is not. So Vue router is confused. There's no path that matches this URL, so it throws an error. To make our routing more robust, if a URL is unmatched like this or 404, we should render a page not found page to our user. This will provide a better user experience. Let's go to views and create a new file and call it notfound.vue. And it's very simple. Let's just put 404 page not found. Next, let's go to the router index file and define a catch-all route to handle all unmatched routes. And here is the syntax. Path not found. So this syntax will match any path that hasn't been matched by a previous route. So you can think of this as a catch-all route. Let's test. So now, if I'm going to blog posts ABC, which is unmatched, it will tell me 404, page not found. But if I'm going to 100, this will not go to this not found. Although in this case, the console will also show 404 not found, but that not found is different from the not found path that we defined in the router configuration. Okay, so now let's go back here. Before we wrap up, I would like to refactor the blog post list component and the blog post component to make them more user-friendly. So let's go to blog post list first. Okay. In most cases, loading blog posts is fast. But what if there is a delay here? Then it's a good idea to show a loading message here instead of making it empty to remind the user that our system is busy loading a list of blog posts so they can wait, right? So here, let's define a loading variable, const loading, initially it is true. Div. If loading is true, then instead of showing a list of empty blog posts, let's just show loading ... Else, we're going to show the list of loaded blog posts. Okay. So as you can see now, it is loading. After find all returns and we update blog posts, let's make loading equal to false, like this. But what if after loading for a long time, it finally failed? It's a good idea to show the error message in here instead of just showing loading. So here, I'm going to define another variable called ERR or error. And by default, it is null. So if loading is true, we're going to render loading here. v-else if error is not null, then we can simply render the error message here. And finally, if loading is false, error is null, that means we successfully loaded all the blog posts. And we can finally render everything here. Okay, then let's come back here and refactor this load blog posts. All right. So here we're going to use a try catch. We're going to try find all. If everything is okay, we're going to put loading.value equal to false. But if we fail to find all, we're going to update the error and show the error here. As you can see, this makes our web page more robust. And by the way, here we can simply just make it an error occurred while fetching the blog posts. Okay, show it here. And let me show you a quick demo. So let's go to the JSON server and let's shut it down. All right. Then if I refresh, as you can see here, it's not showing me loading. Instead, it is showing me an error occurred while fetching the blog posts. So the user will either refresh or contact the website admin. Let's launch the JSON server again. npx JSON server db.json. Okay, so now if I refresh, everything comes back. And similarly, let's do the same thing for blog post. So let's define a loading. Initially, it is true. And here, let me show a different way to show the errors. So here we have div loading ... v-if loading. And here is v-else -if. And then down here, we have v-else failed to load blog post. Please try again later. So v-if, v-else if, v-else. All right. So similarly, try catch. And let's cut this and put it in here. And here we can simply just print the error to the console. Okay. And finally, loading.value is false. So this time, if I type, I'm going to look at blog posts with ID equal to 100, press enter. All right, now we have this, failed to load blog post. Please try again later. Because this one will return an error. Let's look at the console. So right here, failed to load blog post with ID 100. And the consequence is that the blog post is still null, and this final v-else is rendered here. All right, we're done. Let me push the branch to GitHub. Nested routes and dynamic route matching. Git push. In this video, I demonstrated setting up nested routes and subroutes using router view in nested components, defining dynamic route parameters, for example, /blogposts/:id, and accessing route parameters inside components, for example, $route.params.id. We also talk about how to react to param changes using watchers. In the next video, let's talk about named views. See you there.